pleasure of hosting these classes with a bunch of really wonderful teachers. And on this particular day, we're learning from Rabbi Ari Sachs, who's going to take us back to Avodah Zarah 8, which is like one of my favorite Talmud pages, and was last Thursday's page, but we're calling it the previous week.
We're calling the previous week, exactly.
Week defined capaciously.
Right. So hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be able to be with you today. I'm not sure if you can see me from where I am, but this is not my usual setup, I should say. I usually am back home in Philadelphia, but now I'm actually on vacation with my wife in beautiful Montreal. And one of the most amazing things that my wife and I think about when it comes to the life that we want to be able to live is where are the different places that we want to experience. So, in addition to saying where from where you are, we'd love to know where are some of the places that you either have loved to travel to or have wanted or want to be able to experience in meaningful ways. And the reason why I'm sharing that is because, in a certain sense, the issue of interaction with the world around us is at the center of the entire tractate of Masechet Avodah Zarah. I remember speaking to a colleague of mine. We're talking about issues surrounding the notion of what idolatry is, and I was talking to him about how Masechet Avodah Zarah was not about idolatry at all. And my colleague was a little surprised about that, but it's like, it's all about idolatry. And like, what is idolatry? What is idolatrous worship? And really, what it's all about, though, is interacting with people who we call idolaters. And understanding who it is that we call idolaters is extremely relevant for thinking about how Judaism has been able to develop over the past 3,000 years, primarily outside the land of Israel. Because in many ways, living in the land of Israel, in living in a Jewish only world, is kind of the baseline understanding of what Jewish leaders and rabbis have wanted for the duration of our own history, perhaps what God would want. And the challenge is when we cannot live in that world, how do we interact with people who are around us? So one of the issues that appears throughout our dapim this past week is, to what extent can we interact with idolaters and you do business arrangements with them around their holidays, not just on their particular holidays, but on the 3 days both prior to and maybe even after the holidays. And part of that is because when you interact with people who are considered to be this term of idolaters, which again we have not really defined, that it is considered that we are engaging in the same act that they are by virtue of engaging in a business relationship, that the money that we give them or the whatever it is that the deal is that we make with them, they're also going to give thanks to their God, which is going to uproot our requirement to not interact at all with idolaters. And I think it's fascinating then to see, especially in our dapim, and I'm thinking especially about one of the characters who actually ended up being killed by the king for his defense of Judaism and the defense of the Jews, that it is by virtue of our need to interact with idolaters that informs a lot of our ways in regards to how we do business arrangements, how we're able to um, live in a social environment with non-Jews, that has informed the way that Jews have lived in the diaspora for so long. One of my other favorite examples that comes from this particular section, I believe it is in Daf Yud Aleph, has to do with how when we buy materials from idolaters on their holidays, we are not actually engaging with them in business where they're going to give thanks to their God. We're actually redeeming and saving the whether it's animals, livestock, whatever it may be that we purchase from idolaters by virtue of them not having to whether it be sacrificed or be used by idolaters on their holidays. So it's all about how do we do that interaction, and how do we also establish the most important things for us as Jews and as a society. That's all of a bit of a larger background in terms of the not just this section, but also the entire Masechet. It's about how do we interact with idolaters. And one of the most, I think, fascinating segments that I want to share has to do with Daf Chet, as we said, kind of a little bit longer sense of what the week was. And this particular section is one of my favorites because it has to do, although not directly, indirectly, and you're going to see it in a bit of a presentation I'm going to share with you on the holiday of Hanukkah. On the holiday of Hanukkah. And so, with that, I'm actually, if you are able to have a source in front of you, because unfortunately I do not have this as a source sheet, but I will be able to let you know exactly where it is in our learning. So, if you just give me one moment, I'll be able to bring it up and tell you where we are. We are going to be starting on the beginning of, or towards the beginning of 8a. Of 8a. I'm going to be reading from the Sefaria translation of these particular holidays, of this particular section. So this is where it has from the Mishnah on 8a. And these are the festivals of Gentiles: Calenda, Saturnalia, and Cretessus, and the day of the festival of their kings, and the birthday of the king, and the anniversary of the day of the death of the king. So we're talking about these are some of the festivals that we should not be engaging in business together with idolaters. I'm going to skip down now to where it says the Gemara. Gemara, Rav Hanan bar Rava says, when are these festivals celebrated? Calenda is celebrated during the 8 days after the winter solstice, and Saturnalia is celebrated during the 8 days before the winter solstice. And you're mnemonic to remember which festival is that. The one that occurs after the solstice is mentioned first in the Mishnah, and the festival that takes place before the solstice is mentioned after, as in the verse, you have hemmed me in before, behind, and before, and laid your hand upon me, where the word before appears after the term behind. It's basically, it's just a little bit of a word play from the book of Psalms to refer to these holidays. But if you actually take a look at the Hebrew of it, Ahor Vakedem Sartani, Sartani has the same root as tsar, or as in the straits, or my troubles, as if to say these two holidays, interpreting it kind of that mnemonic, that verse with this point, these two holidays are very problematic for us. They cause us a lot of problems. Okay? Now, what I'm actually going to stop reading this section for right now. I'm going to now, hopefully, as long as my phone is able to allow this to happen. So I'm just going to be checking in one thing here to see if it's going to work. Is I'm going to be sharing with you a particular text. Sorry, a particular I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to be sharing with you a particular teaching that I gave as it relates to this section of these particular holidays, and in specific regards to the holiday of Hanukkah. And so, and Rachel, I'm going to ask if you can be able to tell me if this is going to be working. Okay. I'm going to be turning now to over here. Present on this device. Can you see where it says here, it says the Julian calendar?
Yes, we are seeing it in vertical.
You're seeing it vertical? Can you
The
see it
vertical
now?
shot, that's better.
Okay. I actually need to do it this way. I'm going to do it from here. See if that works from here. And as you said, I have a Daf Yomi teaching. Just had a little bit of an error that came up there. Okay.
My autocorrect does that all the time.
Okay. So
compliments in the chat for your beautiful slides.
thank you. So if you take a look at the holiday of Saturnalia, now, one thing I want you to know is this is a picture of what a Saturnalian festival looks like. And it occurs generally on December 17th. there's a lot of greenery that occurs in the home. In many ways, this is the Roman Sukkot holiday. It is the harvest festival. At the end of a harvest at the end of a harvest period, you want to celebrate and give thanks to the sources of your creation, your God, your gods, however it may be, for all the abundance that you have. And if you think about Greek and Roman culture, or I should say geography, where they are in the Mediterranean basin, think about when their harvest season would end. You know, I always complain that celebrating Sukkot in North America is like it's so cold because of when we actually have it, that the harvest season is actually probably a little bit ending earlier in America. But in the Mediterranean, having it end in October or even November or perhaps even in December, that was the end of the harvest season. Now, they wouldn't necessarily go out and create a beautiful sukkah with all of the different vegetations of or bounty of the world around them, but they would bring that all into the home. If we think about what a Christmas tree is right now, it really gets its root from the idea of Saturnalia, of bringing the outside greenery into the home to celebrate the harvest. Okay? And if you can see on this list, there are certain things that people would do. Exchanging of gifts, like with sweets. You'd have the decoration, you have the sacrifice of a pig, which I think in many ways kind of symbolizes how it's a treif kind of experience. But what's also interesting to note is that in the development of Christianity, there was a certain understanding that Saturnalia was an important holiday that people would celebrate. However, that celebration was actually not a celebration, but was a commemoration and even a fast. Okay? In 362, the Common Era, the Council of Laodicea, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, forbade the celebration of Saturnalia. In 1110, a fast was ordered for Christmas rather than a feast. In the 6th century of the Common Era, a bishop in Braga forbade greens in a home. Like, think about that for a second, that you have the Christmas tree as actually being forbidden for actually being a Christmas tree because it was seen too much as being in connection with Saturnalia. So here we have Christians who, in many ways, are treating Saturnalia like it is Avodah Zarah. We do not want to celebrate this holiday. But then you get to the next holiday, what was referred to in the Gemara as Kalenda, but is known as Natalis Invicti, or December 25th, the festival honoring the soul Invictus, the Roman sun god. And this is the Kalenda has to do with fires. So you have fires lighted to observe the return of the sun's power. So I have two like small little pictures here from Provence and from Serbia of actual kind of fire-based celebrations that even happen, I wouldn't say necessarily now, I don't exactly know when it would be, but these fire celebrations that would occur between December 25th and January 1st. We're going to get to this a little bit later on, but the fact that these holidays celebrating the return of the sun god, would actually lead to January 1st, it tells us in a certain way that it leads to this moment at the beginning of the year, and that the sun god is actually supposed to be personified by the Roman emperor, because January 1st, the beginning of the new year, the beginning of the new Senate, you have the Roman leader coming down, the Roman emperor coming down, and it's almost as if he becomes the sun god. And to a certain degree, it may feel like this is also a form of avodah zarah, of turning somebody into a larger god. Okay, now you can see I have the background of the temple because this is important. I want to give a sense in terms of the timeline for the holiday of Hanukkah, because I do want to come back to Hanukkah and how this particular section from the Gemara relates to Hanukkah. So first, you have the actual event of Hanukkah, 164 BCE. Herod was named king of the Jews by Rome, 39 BCE. Second Jewish temple destroyed 70 CE. 210 CE is quote unquote the end of the Tannaitic period. Now, one thing to note, The holiday of Hanukkah was not celebrated as an institution, meaning it didn't happen all the time. It was only partially celebrated, but it wasn't formally instituted until 270 of the Common Era. And think about this for a second. The holiday of Hanukkah was celebrated then, and then even later on, there were still Christians who were not celebrating a holiday having to do with this certain time of the year because of the fact that it was seemingly too connected to Saturnalia. That's the point from the Council of Laodicea in 362 CE. But the teaching that we have that comes from the Tannaitic period, which is not from our Gemara, has to do with the cruise of oil. That particular story is a way to say that God was important with the holiday of Hanukkah as a way of instituting it. But the reason why that teaching is so important is because it needs to make this holiday, which is somewhat celebrated earlier, a little bit more Jewish. And here's what I mean by that. If you take a look at 93-94 CE, this is when Josephus Flavius completed the Antiquities of the Jews, right after 70 of the Common Era. Now, just to think about the holiday of Hanukkah for a second, the holiday of Hanukkah, which we talk about as rededication of the temple, who would want to celebrate the rededication of the temple 23 years after the temple was destroyed? Or to put it another way, in 71 CE, are we celebrating the rededication of the temple when it's lying in ruins right in front of us? It doesn't necessarily make sense that we would be celebrating the holiday at that time, hence why it wasn't necessarily so fully instituted. But then take a look at this teaching from Josephus Flavius. This desolation happened to the temple in the 145th year on the 25th day of the month of Apollines. He's not talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. He's talking about all the way back in 164 BCE, the desecration of the temple by the Greeks, okay? Happened on the 25th day of the month of Apollines, but it was dedicated anew on the same day, the 25th of the month of Apollines on the 148th year. That 25th day is very important. We celebrate Hanukkah on the 25th day of Kislev. 25 is also the day given for 24th, 25th for the beginning of Christmas. And if you saw the slide earlier, it had to do with also the beginning of the holiday of Natalis Invicti or Calenda. And this also goes against a teaching from Herman Wouk, who says it was by a total accident of timing that this minor Hebrew celebration falls close to the calendar year, so the great holy day of the Christian faith. It is just not true, because they are inherently connected to this idea of the 25th day of this month prior to the end of the year. Okay, so the other important thing to think about here, and we're going to get to this and leaning towards the end of what I want to share with you, but it's important for thinking specifically about the teaching that we got from our Gemara, is that in 43 BCE, so before Herod was named king of the Jews, 43 BCE, the Julian calendar was introduced to the Roman Empire by Julius Caesar. Now, in the Julian calendar, according to the Julian calendar, okay, Saturnalia is on the 17th. But more important, Saturnalia falls on the 8th day leading into the winter solstice. Our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, basically moved the calendar back by a couple of weeks. And there's a whole long story as to why that happened, basically a miscounting of the days. But the beginning of Saturnalia was the 8 days prior to the winter solstice, okay? And then you had the holiday Natalis Invicti, Christmas and Hanukkah, as I reference here. And then you have the New Year. And so basically it kind of looks like this, or I should say, let me back up for a second. One of the reasons why this is so significant, and to connect it to the teaching from Hanukkah that we read earlier, and also from our text right now, is that there's a debate in Masechet Shabbat that is very popular about Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Do we light the candles up or do we light the candles down? Beit Shammai says on the first day, one kindles 8 lights and gradually decreases. Beit Hillel says on the first day, kindles 1 light and then gradually increases. And we think it's because it is more holy. I'm not going to get into the details of this because we're not talking about this in terms of our teaching, but imagine that it's less about increasing or decreasing the candles and think about it as increasing or decreasing daylight. So here we go. Ready? Count the suns with me. We got large sun, so now we're decreasing the sun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 24th, that is the winter solstice, the lowest point of the year. We're counting down. That's Beit Hillel in terms of it. Are we thinking about us as observing, in a sense, Saturnalia? Or are we going to follow Beit Hillel, who from the next day, from the 25th, the same as Christmas, as Natalis Invicti or Hanukkah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have to go up 8. In other words, we have the 8 days before the solstice, 8 days after the solstice. One is Saturnalia, the other is Natalis Invicti, and really the debate from Masechet Shabbat is, do we follow the holiday of Saturnalia or do we follow the holiday of Natalis Invicti? I need to get out of this presentation. Think if I can do that. Hold on. I'm going to stop my share. And that's maybe what the way I'm going to do it. Stop share. There we go. So here's the larger point that I'm trying to make here with this kind of movement forward is this. In our text from Masechet Avodah Zarah, what we have is a question or is a point about the fact that there are these 2 holidays that are dangerous to our people. In a certain sense, we don't want to observe any of the holidays. But how could you not? How could we not if we're living in a non-Jewish world, if we're living in a, quote, idolatrous world? And the answer given by our history, when it comes to especially the holiday of Hanukkah, particularly that section from Masechet Shabbat, is that we do observe, in a sense, one of the holidays, not Saturnalia, but we do, in some way, celebrate Natalis Invicti, in the sense of that the sun is coming back up. And one of the best ways to see that and to see the difference of how we're going to make this Jewish in a way comes from our particular Masechet and from our daf that we're looking at today. So now I'm back in Avodah Zarah 8a. Okay, 8a with the section right after we were doing the previous learning. So where we had the Mishnah and then the Gemara and then the next paragraph in Sefaria. With regard to the dates of these festivals, the sages taught, when Adam the first man saw that the day was progressively diminishing, as the days became shorter from the autumnal equinox until the winter solstice, he did not yet know that this is a normal phenomenon, and therefore he said, "Woe is me! Perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me and will ultimately return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder. And this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven, as it is written, and to dust you shall return." He arose and spent 8 days in fasting and in prayer. If you think about the idea of fasting around the Saturnalian holiday, something that Christians did a couple of centuries after the invention of Christmas as it relates to this time of year, it's a similar idea. Fasting when it's a difficult time to be where you are when you're in dire straits. But once he saw that the season of Tevet, i.e., the winter solstice, had arrived, and saw that the day was progressively lengthening after the solstice, he said, clearly the days become shorter and then longer. And this is the order of the world. He went and observed a festival for the 8 days. Upon the next year, he observed both these 8 days on which he had fasted on the previous year and these 8 days of his celebration as days of festivities. And to some degree, that's kind of what we do now, meaning that there's no necessarily ban around celebrating the winter season, the Christmas season around us in the sense of being a part of the world. in which we may live. We may not do all the different acts of celebrating that holiday, but it's a way for everybody to be able to recognize that while the sun may go down, it eventually will return. However, this is what is particular about making these particular holidays, especially I would say the 8 days leading to sun coming back up, as the major holiday that we would be celebrating. And it's about making it Jewish, because it's not about the fact that we have to stay away from festivals or stay away from the world around us. It's about how do we make them Jewish. Upon the next, he, Adam, established these festivals for the sake of heaven, but they, the Gentiles of later generations, established them for the sake of idol worship. He established them for the sake of heaven, but they, the Gentiles, established them for the sake of worship. Christmas became a particular, the Christmas tree became a particular item within Christian households for the holiday, not because of the fact that they couldn't say no to the fact that people wanted to bring greenery into the home, a la Saturnalia, which they were trying to stay away from for a while. It was when they said, you know what, people are doing this, but we need to make this holiday Christian. And so they put the star on top of the tree, the star meaning Jesus, as a way of saying that Jesus is sort of at the top. In other words, it's about making these holidays particular to your religion. When we're lighting the Hanukkah candles from 1 all the way up, we're actually, in a sense, reminding ourselves of the light of the day that's growing, as if the sun is coming back, maybe even the sun god is coming back. But we light them 1 candle at a time, all going up in order, as if to say, this is making it Jewish, reminding us of the temple, reminding us of this notion that God provides for us, that there is this miracle of the oil that's embedded in this holiday. In other words, Masechet Avodah Zarah is less about how do we separate ourselves from Gentiles or separate ourselves from idolaters, and more about how do we live authentically Jewish in a Gentile and idolatrous world. That's all I had to share for today.
Thank you very much. This page always fascinates me. These texts about the 8-day festival of light that was perhaps universal, and then perhaps pagan, and then perhaps Jewish, and what is going on historically. I have so many theories and thoughts, and see it differently every time I read it. So I really appreciate your perspective on that, and there's lots of appreciation in the chat. And we will close it out there, I think, and we will see you all in your inbox tomorrow as we continue our journey through Avodah Zarah. For those who are celebrating, happy July 4th. To those who are celebrating, Shabbat Shalom. And we will see you soon. Thank you, Rabbi Sachs. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
so much, everyone. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.